Well, I wanted to share a little Lord's Supper meditation, something a little bit different. Uh, we, of course, know that the Lord's Supper was instituted by Jesus on the night in which he was betrayed. Matthew and Mark, Luke, and Paul all record what happened as Jesus did that. I think it's kind of interesting to compare what each of them wrote. Both Matthew and Mark say that Jesus took bread, and after he blessed it, he broke it and said, "This is my body. Take and eat." And then after he took the cup and blessed it, he said in Matthew and Mark, "This is my blood," or "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." Matthew adds, "for the forgiveness of sins." And so that's what Matthew and Mark do. And what's kind of interesting is that neither one of them do this in remembrance of me. Luke, as he records it, Jesus takes bread, and after he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And then he said, he took the cup, and after they had eaten, said, "This cup is this cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." So so Luke doesn't add that "do this in remembrance of me" with the cup, but he does do the same order, and he does "this in remembrance of me" for "this is my body," the bread. But he does add that this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which Matthew and Mark just say, this is just the covenant in my blood. Paul is the one actually that's, he says, "I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you." He was betrayed, and when he had given thanks, he broke bread and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant." And there again, Paul mentions that Jesus said, "It's the new covenant in my blood." And he said, "Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." So it's kind of interesting that Paul mentions "in remembrance of me" with both the bread and the cup. Luke only does it with the bread, but Matthew and Mark don't do it with either one of them. And yet there's a consistency across them. And of course, they've got different reasons for telling what's going on. But you see, when we take the bread, we know that it's the sacrifice, or signifies the sacrifice of Jesus's body. And plus, even though we may not necessarily emphasize it, Paul in other places does, but Jesus, after he blesses the bread, he breaks it, and that's a symbol of sharing in the culture in which Jesus and the disciples were raised. And so it's the idea then that there's a sharing in the body, and of course with the cup everybody drinks from it, so there's automatically a sharing there as well. But when we take the Lord's Supper, it's consistent from the gospel writers as well as Paul that the Lord's Supper, it has its focus upon remembering the body and the blood of Jesus, that it's his body given in sacrifice and his blood being shed in order to create the new covenant, and by which, of course, we are all forgiven. So as you partake of the Lord's Supper today, as you partake of the bread, and then you partake of the cup, that's exactly what you'll remember, is what they give us. And even though some of the details are a little bit different in how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Paul present it, there are two things that are consistent, and that is that Jesus took bread, and then Jesus took a cup. And in doing so, Jesus consistently then in each of the four accounts wants us to remember his body and his blood. And so as you partake of that, I hope that that's exactly what you will remember.